Well, good morning, everyone. We're really excited for our first session today. We have some great presenters from Pierce Conservation District presenting on Your County is Multilingual, Lingual is Your Programming. So our two presenters are Camila and Renee. So Camila is the Volunteer Coordinator and Outreach Specialist at Pierce CD and also one of our WAIT Employees of the Year. And Camila cultivated her interest in the environment by studying environmental science at Oregon State University, and her favorite aspects of the job at PCD are interacting with volunteers personally and getting them plugged into great opportunities and the creative process of capturing photos, designing outreach pieces that are getting people excited about stewardship work. And then we have Renee Meschi, and she is the Harvest Pierce County Program Manager at PCD, where she founded the Cultural Ambassador Program in 2016. The Cultural Ambassador Program hosts a network of ambassadors who work with Harvest Pierce County staff to co-design programming in 5 different languages. And their work includes translation, transcreation, and reciprocal relationship building to make sure that PCD's programs resonate with their communities and are reflective of what they want and need. And that process is called community-centered design. And the good news is anyone can do it. So Renee is excited to share this method of co-creative community engagement with you. So welcome, Renee and Camila. We're excited to hear what you have to share. Thanks.
Unmuted. There we go. Hi, thank you so much, Nikki. And thank you for the introduction. I was just looking outside and imagining what it would be like to be just coming from breakfast by the Icicle River at Sleeping Lady and kind of missing that whole experience, but excited that maybe next year we'll be able to do that. Okay. So I guess let's get started. Thank you so much for the introduction. I just want to make sure, because my screen is filled with Camila and I, so I want to make sure that you all can see the presentation slide.
You can. It looks great.
Great. So we have a third presenter who is supposed to be with us here today, also named Renee, who is a program director.
Renee Skaggs.
Renee Skaggs. So it'll make our morning a little less confusing because we only have one Renee to deal with. But Renee did inform a lot of this presentation, so there are certain parts that connect directly to farm team. Luckily, Camila also worked with Renee a lot on those elements. So we missed Renee today, but I wanted to, especially on this title plate, just say that Renee couldn't be with us, but she's with us in spirit in this presentation. All right, so your county's multilingual is your programming. Today we're going to be talking about how to adapt conservation programming to all the different languages that are present in our counties so that we're truly reflective of what our county looks like and our county's collective identity. I'm especially excited because I was here, I think I presented at WAIT in 2017, back when we were first starting this work. So some of you might have even been there. I'm really excited to report what all has happened through the years and the different ways in which we've connected with different programs within our own conservation district, as well as other programs in our community. So our first slide, I'm going to pass to Camila. It's kind of an icebreaker slide.
Yeah. Okay, so just take a look at this slide. And if you saw this flyer, would you want to go to this event? I don't know if I can see people's responses, but can you tell what it's about? Would you stop long enough to look and see that at the very bottom there it says English interpretation services available by request? Like, would you be interested enough to kind of know, like, I want to get translation for this into English? These are kind of rhetorical questions. I know that the answer to these is all probably no, but we just kind of wanted you to get an experience of like what it can be like when this sort of programming, when we don't approach it in a way that like thinks about the people as much and from their perspective of like what it's like to interact with us and not know the language.
Mm-hmm. this is something I think we did in the beginning when we were translating things.
Yeah.
Is we would always put like in a certain language, like se habla español, or like, you know, something small that would say interpretation services available by request, but even like in English. So if somebody were reading, you know, weren't able to read English, the whole flyer would look like this. They would actually have to know the language to know there was interpretation. So this was kind of an example to help you see, maybe this is not a real language, by the way. This is
No.
an
Yeah.
amalgam of letters. Some of
Yeah.
the words.
Created by Rene Meschi.
Just, yeah, open flow. So yeah, next slide. Okay, so our initial prioritization, kind of some of the reasons why we had started this work. And I'm just going to say on the front end, like our flow today, we had the slides divided up a certain way. So we're going to Camila and I are going to kind of go back and forth a little bit, but we appreciate your patience on some of that because Renee Skaggs was going to be with us today. So increasing equity and language access in our programming was identified as a goal in our 2016 strategic plan. That was one of the first times that we actually put it on there in particular, and it's made it an explicit part of our work. And we didn't necessarily know what that was going to mean or where it was going to take us, but we thought that it was important to at least put it in the strategic plan so that we could make that argument in our work that what we were doing was important to our mission as a district. The top languages in urban agriculture at the time were Vietnamese, Khmer, Spanish, and Russian. And so that's where we started. Our goal was that 15% of our programming in the urban agriculture program was low English proficiency, reaching people with low English proficiency. And that was because at the time, there were some statistics available that showed that some 15% of our county primarily spoke a language other than English at home or were low English proficiency. So our goal in our programming was to match what we knew about the county and make sure that our programming reflected that. Through the ag census, this is some of the work that Renee Skaggs did, we identified that the largest minority group in Pierce County agriculture is the Latinx community. And Vietnamese and Spanish are most prominent languages other than English in urban ag. So right away, we kind of had a little bit of specificity, right? So in the urban agriculture spaces, Vietnamese is much more of a prominent language need than what we saw in the ag census. So we adapted our programming and kind of created specific approaches based on that. This is a timeline, a brief timeline from when we first started conceptualizing this work, just so you can kind of see how it moved and how it became a part of our regular programming. So in 2015, that is when we were having all of those conversations, writing our new 5-year strategic plan. We included the word equity in there for the first time. We specifically made that a part of our work. We included working with different languages in there. We didn't necessarily have the nuts and bolts of programmatically what that was going to look like at the time, but we identified it as a priority. And I believe that's what really helped us take the steps that we took. 2016 is when the ambassador program was funded by the National Association of Conservation Districts. They gave us an initial grant of $50,000. It was a pilot within Harvest Pierce County Programs and Events, which is our urban agriculture realm. And initially, we had written the grants to help us translate and potentially interpret, but mostly translate a lot of our materials. We quickly realized that if we didn't have the relationships with the people we were hoping to reach, the translations would fall flat. We had a few classes where we would hire an interpreter and translate a flyer, kind of like the one that you saw in the beginning. And we would hand them out everywhere at big events, places where we knew that people who spoke that language would frequent. and nobody would show up. Because why would they? They didn't know us. They didn't, you know, maybe some people would have interest, but also like, I think some people initially had some fear. Um, you know, social anxiety like affects all of us to a certain degree. So if you're invited to a big event and you know you're not going to know anybody there, and you might be the only person who's not speaking the prominent language, it can feel a little uncomfortable if you don't know the people and don't kind of, you're not already familiar with and interested in the programming. So I bring this up because we were able to submit an amendment to this grant to focus more on relationship building and transcreation with the communities that we hoped to reach. And NACD was amazing about this. It was such a kind of out of the box idea from what I think they were hoping to fund, but they said yes. And it changed our programming. It had a deep impact on everything that we do. So I just want to say I'm super thankful to NACD for supporting something like this and helping us build that framework. 2017, PCD wanted to keep the momentum of what NACD, what we were able to pilot with NACD, and so they dedicated an outreach budget starting at $10,000 a year and increasing by $10,000 annually until 2020. So that is the budget that funds all of this work, and I'm super grateful that we were able to pilot something with the support of the NACD and then actually work it into our institutional framework. In 2018, we started to get grants from other institutions and work with, in particular, the health department. And so we hosted the Kaiser Permanente Walkability Grant, and that helped us expand the basic model of what we were doing to other organizations. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then within PCD, the AG COI, which is really hard to explain, but the nutshell is it's the Agriculture Community of Interest group. It's kind of a collaborative multi-agency work group in Pierce County. They dedicated $7,920 to fund the Cultural Navigators, which is a pilot project of the farm team focusing on Latinx farm community. So Camila's going to talk a bit more about that today, but 2019 is when they got that pot of funds to do a pilot specifically geared toward that community. And then 2020, the pandemic, the pandemic hit. It really shook us up, but we did use it as a chance to bring focus to written materials, Spanish radio programming, subtitled videos. We were able to kind of do a little bit more like inward thinking of how we could further institutionalize this sustainably. And we also worked a little bit with the health department. I just want to point out that this kind of communication is valuable to our entire community. And these relationships became really important as the health department wanted to reach people who had low trust, who needed access to COVID-19 testing, vaccine outreach, stuff like that. So any groups with established relationships in communities that speak languages other than English were vital to making sure that information got out in a culturally appropriate way. So we were a small part of that outside of the CD stuff, but I just wanted to let you all know that this is really, really crucial work. Any energy we can put into communication pathways benefits our entire community. Camila, do you have anything to add to this before I go to the next slide? It's okay.
No, I think that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So that brings us to what the Cultural Ambassador Program is today. 16% of our annual program participants, and when I say our, I should have adjusted the slide to say HPC. So 16% of HPC, Harvest Pierce County annual programming participants are either low English proficiency or speak a language other than English at home. We directly work with grassroots community leaders and groups, and that means not all of them are 501c3s. We work with a lot of individuals to make this work happen. So we manage about 150 contracts per year within the Harvest Pierce County program alone. And our languages that we work in include Vietnamese, Khmer, Russian, Ukrainian, Moldovan, Spanish, Laotian, and Korean. Our core network, we have about 20 cultural ambassadors at this point, 4 cultural navigators within the farm team Latinx farm outreach program. There are about 17 grassroots organizations that we work with regularly. We also hired 2 bilingual financial counselors. They're bilingual in Vietnamese and Spanish, because a lot of the people that we were contracting with were being independent contractors for the first time. And if you couple that with, you know, them preferring financial counseling in a language other than English to make sure that they're fully understanding what it means to receive funds from the district, what it means to be an independent contractor, having financial counselors has been a really amazing addition to this program. And we have 12 community ambassadors. And so this model has kind of expanded beyond language. And when we say community ambassadors, it's really people who are connected to different groups that we might not be reaching in the community. So those are BIPOC organizations, certain indigenous communities. Basically, this was a way to make sure that we were designing our programming with different communities in mind from the beginning and really co-designing with people. And so we created a role called community ambassador for that, to make sure that when we do that, we're paying community for their expertise and making sure that it's a reciprocal relationship. I will say, for the purposes of doing this at your own district, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but all of what is on here, these are all kind of contractors that we work with, and some of them we pay regularly, but they're not full-time positions. These are kind of retainer, they're on retainer, and we work with people as needed for different projects, and it's kind of more of a freelance situation. And some of them, they have kind of morphed into being a more regular stipended role with us, but at this point, these aren't full-time benefited positions. So I just wanted to make that clear as you're starting to think about doing something similar in your own district. Okay, so tools in the toolbox. This is what we use. I think in the beginning we thought, for example, let's see if I can get the animation to work. There we go. Translation. This is one of the first things that we think of. This is the first thing that we thought of when we were first funded to do this work and first trying to imagine what it might mean for us. That refers to translating written material from one language to another. So when we say interpretation, that's what we mean when it's spoken translation. And consecutive interpretation is what most people think of when they think of interpretation, if they already know what that word means. So that refers to spoken translation. So like 40 to 60 words spoken in the source language, followed by a pause, and then the interpreter conveys that message in the target language. There's also simultaneous interpretation. So that refers to kind of the same thing as consecutive spoken translation. The interpreter lags slightly behind the source language speaker, interpreting at almost the same speed as the original message being said. They're typically doing this into a little like microphone transmitter, and then people who are attending the event will be receiving that in a headset. So most companies, you rent that technology and will contract with simultaneous interpreters because it's a very difficult skill. We at the district in 2018 were able to purchase our own simultaneous interpretation headsets, and we would use those pretty regularly at our events where we would have more than 3 languages present. And the interpreters kind of like speak quietly into the microphone, and then it goes right into the ears of the people who need it, and they would kind of plug into each station because it's a radio broadcaster, and that's how the different channels of languages would work. So that brings us to transcreation, which is really where we started with the NACD work. Transcreation refers to the tailoring of a message, class, or program to the cultural backgrounds of the target audience. Transcreation is a really important part of our work because what it means is, like, I think we realized that a lot of our programming, we always have surveys afterwards. We're always asking people what they want, what they need, but we were doing that in English for so many years. So our programs were really actually custom tailored to a specific group of people that we had been getting feedback from for years. And I don't think we quite realized that. We almost needed to start over with a lot of our programming and really listen and really understand the communities we were hoping to reach and then create something together. And of course, that leads us to ambassadorship, which is just something a little more specific to that transcreation process. Ambassadors do all of the above and more. They have cultural expertise and lived experience that strategically inform outreach and program development. So we find community leaders that are leading in some way in a community that we're hoping to connect with. And we work with them and we ask them questions. We connect with them in different ways. And this happens a lot in programming, but we were really trying to professionalize this relationship to make sure that it's a reciprocal exchange, and also we're building the capacity of the community leaders that we're working with. And I'm gonna pause and see if Camila has anything to add. Like I said, I wanna make sure I leave space for that.
No.
You don't have to, I'm so sorry, okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I thought about it. I don't have anything to add. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, again, we're doing this because we had this split into 3, so I'm trying to make sure that I don't leave anything out. Okay, next slide. There we go. All right, highlights. Camila, do you want to do the farm highlights?
Yeah.
If I can get them to animate. There we go.
Okay, so this is just kind of a summary of some of the things that we've done. So we have 4 cultural navigators, and we've had 2 meet and greet barbecues with like 30 attendees. And so, which I'll be talking more about what those were later on, and 5 Latinx owned farm visits and tabling at a Latinx rodeo event. And like before 2019, like there was 0. So this is like a lot for us. And a workshop and farm tour with cultural navigators in partnership with King Conservation District.
Okay, and then the Harvest Team Cultural Ambassadors, which had been going for a little bit longer, so this is what it kind of flowed into today. We now have 13 community gardens that are multilingual, that are primarily speaking one language or have different gardeners that have different language needs. We have a network of 83 community gardens, so that puts into context what percentage there are primarily speaking another language. Again, 15% of overall programming participants now multilingual, and we now have fully non-English programming, so that's been an important step for us as well. Something else kind of beautiful that's come of this is the cultural sharing between LEP communities. If they don't have English in common, it's hard for them to connect with each other, but that has been an important step of like having multiple languages at our events, such as our annual garden tour, where we toured the some of the 13 different gardens that primarily speak a different language, and really focus the translation to try to make sure that those communities could communicate across to each other, not just to us and bouncing back out. And so some of the cool things that have happened from that, for example, is on the tour that year, our Vietnamese gardeners, you can see in the back, there's Mrs. Howe, and she's at the Viet Hung Community Garden, and they are experts in growing chayote, which is a hanging squash that they have acclimatized to the Pacific Northwest for decades now. It's a really beautiful squash plant, and it turns out that some of the Mexican and Mexican indigenous gardeners that we're working with that's one of their cultural foods, and they've been trying to grow it here and had been having trouble. So they saw in the Vietnamese garden how well they were doing it, and were able to communicate with each other to share tips and figure out the best way to get them to grow. And those gardeners were able to provide them with some chayote, sprouting chayote that had been acclimatized, that they could grow while they were acclimatizing their own strains of chayote. And those kinds of experiences, I think, really enrich how this programming is connective tissue, not just for the district to community members, but community members to each other as well. There we go. So we're getting the case studies now, and I'm not going to share every detail of what happened here, but we did think this part was important. Dia de los Muertos is an event that we had fiscally sponsored as a part of the Kaiser Permanente Walkability grant that we did, where we were trying to expand this model and help the health department and other local municipal organizations really work to co-create programming. And this is a little bit far afield from what our conservation district does. The focus was supposed to be on walking and promoting walking and groups that advocate walking in Pierce County. Dia de los Muertos exemplifies like how our model is co-creative and how things that are important to the community show up in ways that you might not recognize on the outset. So we never thought that it would take us to Dia de los Muertos, like trying to figure out how to support community leaders who care about walking in our community. But an important part of Dia de los Muertos for this group was a walking procession. And in particular, they closed down Portland Avenue, which is a very busy and very dangerous street in Tacoma's East Side neighborhood. And they brought the Aztec dancers you can see in the photo and closed down the street and did a walking procession to honor everyone who's lost their lives on the road and to bring attention to that. And they also, cared about organizing to make sure that people feel safe walking in their own community. And this is one way that they did that. And it was a part of a really big collaborative, co-creative event. But I think it shows that sometimes when you start working with a group and you have a certain metric or idea in mind, such in this case, walkability, but it could be anything, certain things will come up that you might not see the connection at first, but it ended up being a really powerful one. It ended up building important relationships with our group and with the conservation district, and that leads us to another event that we co-created and fiscally agented, and that was the Swan Creek Limpieza. So some of the organizers from this actually were on the east side, very connected to the Swan Creek stream, which is nearby, and really wanted to make sure that they were honoring the stream as a living being and wanted to have a cleanup, but an indigenous and in particular Mexican indigenous centered cleanup that recognized the beingness and personhood of the stream and really came at it with that collaborative mindset. So we never thought that they would that the group would go in this direction. They did. They ended up in a really kind of genius way pulled out so many tires from the creek, and it's a salmon bearing stream, so many of you here know how bad that is for salmon, and they were able to remove 1.7 tons of trash in 2020. Then they combined forces with the Puyallup tribe the next year and were able to remove 7 tons of trash in 2021. And this is all during the height of the pandemic. They did this outdoors in socially distanced groups. It was really watching people organize and supporting these groups to organize. I think it was really beautiful to see it bloom into conservation-centered things that helped our own water quality team now connect with this group and co-create and plan things in the future that are community-driven and are recognizing and honoring the indigenous and Mexican indigenous communities in the area that do connect with this park in a very specific way that had not to this point been reflected in our programming. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide and pass it to Camila for the Asados.
Thanks. Renee, maybe you can send, we have a video with some of the folks who organized and were part of the cleanup that we made.
Yeah.
So if you have a chance, Renee, maybe you can put it send it to the attendees. I think it's really nice to hear from folks themselves how it went. It's a nice video.
For sure.
So hi everyone. I'm going to talk about our asados. And this was kind of like our first event that we did to try and reach the Latino community. So it was significant in that sense. Let me just get my notes over here. So as you know earlier, like in 2019, we had two what we called them barriadas, but it was basically an event at this person's farm. The person cooking the meat here, that's Agustin, who is a farmer from Mexico who has his own organic farm. And basically, we wanted to, our goal in sort of starting this program of trying to reach out to the Latino community was to really build relationships. And we were able to kind of build off of what Harvest Pierce County had learned through their programming of like the importance of relationships, and like my own experience too, and the guidance of the Latino navigators of just knowing that with working with the Latino community, like relationship is super important. You kind of need to start there and then start going to the more technical side of things. So basically we created this event in conjunction with our cultural navigators. We had been meeting like every month, kind of making goals of like different groups to reach out to, and then coming back and talking about what we had learned, and realized we really needed a way to kind of take a next step in building trust and relationships. And so we decided that it would be good to have an event. But we thought, you know, we didn't feel like we were ready and didn't have the relationship at this point to have like just like a farm, like some kind of presentation or a class. And we also didn't feel like we knew exactly how to have that in a culturally like relevant way. So we decided to have this this asado. And when we went into it, we kind of set a goal to ourselves of like the two goals for this event. Like the purpose was to build relationships and make an impression so that folks would want to come back and work with us and like have a voice in the community, and like folks have a good impression of us. And then we also knew going into it that was our purpose, but then we knew that the environment we wanted to have was one that was more informal and welcoming, because just knowing and chatting with the cultural navigators and just through our experience learning about Latino culture, we knew that was really important. Like that environment was just as important as maybe what our purpose was. So that's why we kind of settled on, as we were talking, realizing, well, why don't we just have, you know, food brings us all together. And we had one of our cultural navigators, Agustin, who's the one there cooking the food, has his own farm and has worked with us and has put like best, you know, done the different like best management practices on his land. So why not have an event there? So I think that a lot of the benefit from this holding these events was I mean, it was a couple of things. One was like just the experience of thinking through like what the culture was that we were reaching out to, and trying to plan an event around that and really being thoughtful. And then also just the process of inviting people. We learned a lot through that. So, which was, I think, just as important as the planning of the event. So our invitation process was, we kind of thought of about Latino farmers that we knew and kind of split up. So some of the navigators just went and visited farms on their own, and then there were some folks that we visited, or like PCD staff visited with the cultural navigators. And a lot of those visits actually happened just kind of spur of the moment, not spur of the moment, like we planned ahead of time and then just visited folks at their home, not necessarily calling ahead of time because we may not have had their contact information. And that was something that was hard for staff at first because I think in white culture, like it's weird or rude to just visit somebody at their home without like letting them know ahead of time, especially if you don't know them. But in Latino culture, that's actually been a helpful way to kind of start a relationship. It's not necessarily as weird to just stop by. And also we had the cultural navigators, there. And so that was kind of a way to kind of start the relationship too. And it's, a lot of maybe people here are farm planners. When you meet with somebody on their own land, it's a better way to build a relationship too, because you see kind of a part of them. It's, they're more vulnerable, which is maybe why it can be kind of scary to visit folks. And by the way, like some of the folks we had to visit, we had tried to reach out to them with like email, or maybe not email, but with letters and stuff, and that just really wasn't reaching them. We didn't have that relationship for them yet to like read the letters we sent, to like care, or maybe, I don't know, it just, the relationship wasn't there yet for that to kind of be a way to initiate contact. So that was honestly like some of the relationships that we formed from that just kind of outreach have kind of continued till now, even if they didn't come to the actual event. And as far as like what we actually did at the barriada, I was going to kind of give an overview. So one, the food was cooked by Agustin himself, which I think was really nice, and it was very tasty. It was really simple. It just, cooked meat, and we had tortillas, and we brought like the desserts and drinks, and then, we had salsas and stuff like that. And it started at 6, and we decided to not just start with the programming exactly at 6, but we knew kind of from our understanding of Latino community and the advice of the navigators that people are going to roll in. People are not like culturally not going to just show up at 6 and then be ready to go. So we decided to have the eating for like the first 45 minutes so people could kind of go in, and so that we as staff could also mingle and get to know people. And so that was something we prepared ourselves for ahead of time too, to be like, okay, it could be really easy for staff to just sit with each other and talk with each other, but we really need to spread out and try and get to know each other people, because it's, I think I don't think it's a malicious thing, but just kind of with human nature, it's easy to chat with the people who are like you, and you might feel nervous, but everybody's feeling nervous, and we're the ones organizing this, so we need to make sure we're really welcoming and trying to talk with people. And that worked really well, honestly. As you can see in this picture, like staff aren't really sitting next to each other. The people who have green shirts are PCD staff. And that's a good way to just start that conversation, And then we also had the navigators who were able to spread out and kind of help those conversations happen, right? If there was a language barrier. And then at 6:45, we had like a very brief kind of introduction to who Pierce Conservation District is, like Renee Skaggs, not this Renee, just kind of briefly introduced who we are. And we had some also kind of during that eating time, we had stuff people could look at. We had like a table with information. And then we also had some of our rental equipment on the side as an example of some of the services we offer that people could check out. And then sort of the main event was actually just doing a tour of the farm with Agustin. So we just kind of walked around the farm, and he told folks about his experience working with PCD and the different things we had helped him do. And that was, I think, a really powerful way to show folks like, hey, you can work with us, and also like these are the things that you can do. And it was pretty informal. It's like people asked questions like as they went, and it was mostly in Spanish. It was Agustin talking about it, and like maybe me translating or something to staff so they knew it was happening. And then so we went around and kind of ended with looking at the farm equipment and people kind of knowing what you could rent. And then it wasn't over. Then we like had prepared ourselves for like, okay, if people want to stay, then we want to socialize more and build off of those relationships that we've been making. So I don't know, I think it went until 8 or 9 or something like that. But I maybe have been rambling on a little bit, but that's kind of like, I just wanted to give you an idea of like what the what it was, and we were very thoughtful going into it, and just like with every element of it, from like how we interacted with folks to how long we stayed to the programming, trying to make it just like culturally relevant, something that someone would feel comfortable going to who was Latino, you know. And I think, like I said, like this was a really good start for us, and um, you know, it's kind of led to one of the folks that we had visited and wanted to connect with. Um, I don't think they were actually able to come to the event, but like we've continued to try and have that relationship, and like now they're saying they really want to have best management practices on their farm. They're like, we don't know what to do, and we want to be like a leader for the Latino community, and we want to be able to host events and stuff like that. So, and it also led to just different relationships, like with the Charro Association, which is a lot of the Latinos in our area have horses and to do charros, which is like a Mexican rodeo. And so a lot of the beginnings of those relationships were through invitations to this event. So yeah.
I think that transitions us pretty well to the
Yeah,
lessons learned.
to the lessons learned.
Yeah, this again, that's Renee Skaggs, who's not here, and
Yeah,
Augustine, and this is part of the tour part of the asado, right?
exactly. Yeah. Augustine with his cool hat.
Yeah. So yeah, Camila, maybe we can alternate through these, but this is something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, a lot of ambassador navigator communities prefer drop-ins. You know, just visiting and dropping in briefly. If they're busy, you can just be like, hey, can I come back another time? Like, if it's not a good time, you can just ask, you know. Another thing to keep in mind is what might work for one community might not work for others, even if they speak the same language. So interpreted webinars didn't really work for the Latino, the rural Latino, or like the Latino farmer community, but like it wasn't something that folks were really interested in during the pandemic. But we had this interpreted radio live stream called, what was it called?
Huertos de comestibles.
Yeah, I wanted to say Cuidemos la Tierra. I just got stuck in my head. Huertos de comestibles. And that was really well. And you know, again, that was actually a more informal setting. It's like it was the host Wendy, who's really dynamic, talking to somebody about like the programming that we do. It wasn't as formal.
Yeah, and it was
But just
on
like, yeah,
like that they already. It was like grassroots community
right.
Spanish radio.
Exactly. And so there's nuances to this. So like if something doesn't work, think about like why, just try to think about it more deeply, because we could have just been like, well, interpreted stuff online doesn't work, and not tried huertos de comestibles.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this is really important. So when co-creating programs, so like to kind of preface it, like me, the way I was involved, sometimes I felt like I was like a cultural navigator to the cultural navigators. Because being from a Latino background, like I come from both backgrounds. My mom is white and my dad is Latino. And so I'm really used to navigating between the two worlds. And so sometimes I would have to kind of work with staff to help them understand where the cultural navigators were coming from. At the beginning. I think now we've gotten to this point where this kind of is where it comes from. We co-create programming with the ambassadors, but we have to gain the psychological safety before they tell us what they really think. So you have to really like, folks might be quiet at first depending on the person. You have to really give space and like listen and kind of, you know, just be there and build the relationship. Just like you're trying to build the relationship with the community, you also have to apply that with the cultural navigators you're working with and build that psychological safety. Because they may not, they like, especially with Latino community, like the Latino culture too, sometimes they'll be like, yeah, like they may be more agreeable than they actually are. They'll go along with, they'll say yeah, but then they won't do it, which is just kind of, you know, something you might not know if you haven't interacted with the culture before.
Yeah, we had that happen with some of the Vietnamese communities that we work with. And just to let you know, like what Camila is saying, communities aren't monoliths, right? So we have about 7 to 10 different Vietnamese cultural ambassadors that we work with, depending on, are we, you know, going to the Vietnamese Buddhist community? Is it the Vietnamese Baptist community? Is it like young Vietnamese recent immigrants? Is it refugees who came here in the 90s? Like these are all very different sub-communities. But for one of those communities in particular, like we were administering surveys at the end of events and found out that they really don't feel like they can say on a survey what they really thought of an event, especially with a group like a conservation district that's connected to the government. So like they were all like, great, 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 everything was great. But it wasn't until we met with them afterwards and had like a little, like brought like cookies and tea and just chatted about it that they were able to say what they really thought. So that's something important to keep in mind.
Oh yeah. So a lot of ambassadors haven't been independent contractors before, so things that we might take for granted, just like making an invoice or keeping track of your hours or doing a time card, like on your own, are things that might be challenging for them. Like some of our cultural navigators, like the way we approached it was to have them do a time card, which I think in retrospect we would have maybe actually just done, like, we're going to pay you for this set amount of hours and we'll just pay you, because folks ended up feeling bad. Like some of our culture navigators would be like, well, this work is so important for me, like I would do it for free, and then they would feel bad like coming up with hours or just not know how to do invoices. And just kind of be aware of that and make sure that you're not taking advantage of folks who really care about the work. Like we've had to kind of sit down sometimes with the culture navigators and be like, okay, like these are, like just like write their hours with them and be like, no, we want to pay you. Like we know you would do this for free and you're awesome, but like also we have this money and we need to spend it. So you're helping us, spend the money.
There's cultural expertise. Like we literally can't do our job without them. You know what I mean? So like no matter what kind, like we need them to do our work. So that was a really important power dynamic that we wanted to build, where it's like when we come to the table, we don't want the person who's helping us connect with these communities to be the only one who isn't being paid or to be the lowest paid. So we pay them contractor rates and make sure that those rates are covering the overhead that they're taking on themselves. So yeah, $45 an hour and above, depending, is like a general rate that we started with, and we can kind of get into the specifics of that a little bit later. But I just want to stress like this: if you pay them $15 an hour, they're going to have to be taxed on that.
Yeah, and it's taxed at a different rate as a contractor.
Yeah, so
Right.
you really need to account for that so that you're actually helping.
And that's something we're still learning about and trying to figure out the best way, I think, too, and kind of sharing with each other what we're learning, like
Yeah.
HBC and farm.
So we're kind of getting into like the last bit of our presentation. I know we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to speed through some of the next. I think we can probably get through the rest of what we have in like 5 minutes, so people can have at least 5 minutes for questions. Does that sound good to you, Camila?
I realize you can't see me. Yes, that sounds good.
Okay.
I was nodding and doing this.
Yeah. So the last point just being about how the work doesn't progress linearly, like make sure that you know that there's stops and starts, and if you have a sense of urgency about the work, like definitely it's urgent, but like approaching it with urgency can actually be like a relationship destroyer in many cases. So it's good to budget resources and to budget time toward this work. I'm going to breeze through this really quickly. What's next? We're working with different municipal agencies right now to create a shared language access policy, because we realize there are a lot of municipal organizations like the city, Metro Parks, the health department, and we don't actually have a standardized policy around language access or language justice. So we're hoping to draw upon this work and learn from each other and really share so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page, because we're all interfacing with the same community members, right? So that's one thing on the horizon. PCD's water quality program is going to start an ambassador team, and just like you saw with Camila and Renee's work, starting, even though PCD already has ambassadors within Harvest Pierce County, our ambassadors are very specific to urban agriculture and leaders within the urban agriculture community. So it's almost like starting over each time. Camila and Renee had to really start from square one and build that community from the ground up within farm team. Our water quality program is going to start doing the same thing. A lot of that inspired by that limpieza that we talked about earlier with Swan Creek. we're working with the City of Tacoma Solid Waste. They're starting a Recycle Reset Ambassador program to help community leaders who are passionate about recycling reach their communities. And we in particular are helping with the Russian speaking community. So actually in the picture is our Russian speaking cultural liaison, cultural ambassador Svetlana. And she's right here seen interpreting at one of our tour events. And she's the one working on this project with the city. Lots of co-creation happening there. Mason CD, I don't know if any of you out there are from Mason CD, but I heard that they got funding from the NACD to start their own cultural ambassador program, which I think is super cool. And another shout out to the NACD for continuing to support this kind of work. I think that's amazing, and I can't wait to hear more once they get going. The Washington Charro Association, that's what Camila was mentioning earlier, collaborating on an in-person workshop this summer and outreach table at their rodeos. That's a really cool connection that's come from this. And cuidemoslatierra.org, Farm Team and Harvest Pierce County programs in PCD are creating a website completely in Spanish with a dedicated phone line with Spanish content. We're basically just rethinking all of our programming from the perspective of those communities that we want to invite to it, and working with ambassadors to create this website piece by piece. Cuidemos la tierra means like, let's take care of the earth, like we're going to take care of the earth together. And that's something that the ambassadors came up with themselves as the URL for it, which is really beautiful. And of course, the financial counselors who are contracting with the district to cover some of what Camila was talking about. The process, I do want to be mindful that we have 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we hear questions. So Camila, what do you think about the process? Should we kind of quickly go through this slide and maybe people can write their questions while we're doing that? And
yeah, that sounds good. I can do this if you want. I'll just breeze through it. So process. Yeah, so just be creative and curious in finding out what language groups are most needed in your field. Find leverage points. Where's the momentum? Identify community leaders. Start small, project-based. Have a group where you're trying to learn together, and make space to plan and reflect together on what you're learning. That's been super important for our process. And go where invited. So, you know, be creative and curious in finding what language groups are most needed in your field. You know, you don't just go with the connections that you have and have, I don't know. Yeah.
And if people invite you to something that doesn't seem directly connected to your work, go. You never know how it's going to connect.
Be curious.
Those led to the Limpia, like you never know.
And just try it. You know, you might not know what the best language is to start with, but if you have a connection or you have an inkling, just go with it. Like, you're starting from, you know, if you don't have anything, something is better than nothing, and you can like just be in a mode of learning and learn as you go and adapt.
Yeah, and that's Camila in the picture, being creative and curious.
Yes.
Great finds.
Hamming it up for the camera.
Yeah.
So those are our emails there. You can be in touch. And yeah, we can take questions, I guess.
Yeah, we can't see. I don't know if you can, Camila, but I can't see questions.
I can't either.
I'll relay it to you, ladies. I've got it for you. All right. First of all, thank you very much. A lot of comments about this was an awesome presentation, extraordinarily helpful information. And I know there's probably more questions than time. So I just want to remind folks, if we don't get through all the questions, I will send them to Renee and Camila. They will respond, and I'll put those in the chat so everyone can see them. But we'll start with the first question. Actually, earlier in your presentation, you had a flyer up. Someone asked, what language was that flyer written in?
Renee made that language up.
I had a feeling. Okay.
It's flow state, like I speak a couple different languages, and I just kind of like fuse them. So if any of you speak Bulgarian, you might have noticed some Bulgarian words in there, but other than that, it's nothing. It means nothing.
The creative mind of Rene and Meschi.
I love it. Okay, a good catch on that person trying to figure it out. Next, is there a website that explains the Cultural Ambassador Program? Is this program a PCD program or a program that PCD is part of?
Yeah, it's a program at PCD. And Alan, our director right now, actually asked me that, like, why don't we have it on our website yet? And I was like, that's a great point. So I think we're gonna like
We should
use
talk about it at the comms team.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're gonna like use this presentation, some of the overview materials to put it in there. The only reason why we don't have it up right now is because we would get a lot of requests from other organizations that want to hire our ambassadors to do things for them. And it's a co-creative specific thing, and we kind of didn't want to like, I don't know, we were just very focused on the relationship building. It's not quite what they were thinking, but I think a website that describes that would help. I just think the general patterns that have been emerging lately on co-creative design weren't as clear back then, and now that they are, we are going to be putting up a website about it.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Great. So last question that we have time for, and then the rest we'll answer via chat. Are any cultural ambassador program working on Native or tribal relationships?
Yeah, actually, so I mentioned some of the Mexican indigenous communities that we're working with a couple of times, and right now we're hosting a collaborative indigenous food sovereignty garden that focuses on traditional foodways and traditional lifeways, and it's in partnership with the Puyallup tribe. And it's a place that centers indigeneity, it centers indigenous language revitalization. So we're talking about a lot of non-English languages today, but Tulshutseed and Lushootseed are very important languages that are in a revitalization process that require very specific care and centering. And this garden is a place where the idea is children will be able to self-narrate what they're doing with plants, using the plant's original names and using the action words associated with those plants. And the Purepecha, which is a specific Mexican indigenous community connected to this project, has a similar language revitalization that their language is not necessarily being revitalized in general. There are a lot of native speakers of Purepecha still today, but helping children here learn that through their heritage plants and doing it together alongside the Puyallup tribe. So that's been a very like careful process for us to try to support and make sure that basically we see our job as allowing the access, like liaising between the property owners. We're holding an interlocal agreement with the property owner and providing insurance for the space and trying to really do whatever we can to remove the institutional obstacles for this kind of thing to happen.
Yeah. And one thing that helps too is one of our full-time staff members is a member of the Puyallup tribe too. So,
well, unfortunately, we're out of time. So I will relay questions to Renee, and you guys can respond. I'll get it back out to the audience, and I'll relay some other comments to you guys. But thank you both so much, Renee and Camila. That was a really interesting presentation. I wish it had been 2 hours long.
I know, it's hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
I'm glad you liked it. So